Hi there, it's October 26th, and today we're looking at a new letter of Paul. This time it's Paul's letter to Titus, the last letter of Paul that we'll be looking at in our journey through scriptures. So we're looking at chapter 1, verses 1 to 16, the whole chapter. Titus was an associate of Paul, a friend of Paul. He's first mentioned in Galatians 2. He doesn't get a mention in the Acts of the Apostles, but he's mentioned in Galatians 2 as being someone who travelled with Paul to Jerusalem. Paul had also taken Timothy. Timothy was circumcised because he was half Jewish, but Paul says he didn't force Titus, who he says was a Greek, to be circumcised. So we're clear here that Titus, if this is the same Titus, this is Titus, a Greek. It's had by tradition that he was from Antioch in Syria. As I say, he travelled with Paul. He actually carried Paul's letter, some of Paul's letters, to Corinth, and he seems to have been instrumental in Corinth in bringing warring factions together. So he seemed to be quite an important part of Paul's mission and Paul's people who are being sent out. And Paul actually sends him in this letter, he finds him in Crete, the island that belongs to Greece, and he is probably connected with a settlement around what's modern day Heraklion in Crete. And here Paul encourages Titus to establish the church, to appoint elders. Later on, Titus is called to go to Dalmatia, and Dalmatia is on the coast, which is now Croatia, and that part of the world, opposite Italy. And then finally, in chapter 3 of this book, there's a reference to Titus travelling, where Paul tells him to come and join him at Nicopolis. So Titus is obviously a well-travelled man, but also one who is very good at bringing the organisation and the order of Jesus to his church. And so Paul opens his letter to Titus with his normal greetings, declaring his apostolate, declaring his position of being an envoy of Jesus, and he encourages, he directs that this is going to Titus, who he's left in Crete, and who he calls a faithful son, a faithful child. And so reflects this close relationship that there is between us. So the first matter that Paul says in leaving Titus in Crete, Paul has wanted Titus to install elders there. Presbyteri in Greek, presbytery, presbyters, as we would call them, maybe, just means older brothers. And this is the group of people, and it's a group of people. It's a plural elders that are here, so that reflects that plurality of leadership that Paul is saying, and similarly to the things that he said to Timothy, that they should be of good reputation, that they should be married to one wife, that they should be well respected by outsiders, not alcoholics. And so all of these things that will make them good leaders, strong leaders, well-established leaders in the Church of Jesus. One thing that's interesting here, in verse 7, Paul talks about an elder as being an episkopon, or episkopos. And we saw earlier in other places that in Timothy, that episkopos is the word from which the modern word bishop comes, but actually it's just the Greek word for overseer or supervisor. And here Paul connects the role of episkopos with the role of elder. And so he's not looking at a separate bishop, someone who is the high hegon of the church. He's actually saying that the elders are overseers, they are episcopi. And therefore there's again this plurality of leadership that Paul envisages. And these are people who will teach, these are people who will impart the message of Jesus, and they're important for each church because they will bring the direction in collegiate responsibility, but they will bring the direction to the church, and that's why Paul wants Titus to install them there and to ordain them there. Because it seems there are problems in Crete. It looks as though there are influences from outside. Probably the Judaizers are coming in. Those who've troubled people in Galatia, they're coming here again and saying you need to be following Jewish traditions and Jewish laws. There may even be some Jewish mysticism in there. But Paul does an interesting thing. It also refers to a saying in verse 12, a saying of a Cretan poet, he calls him. Well, this refers to something that's called the Epimenides paradox. And it was a famous thing connected with Crete. Epimenides was a Cretan philosopher or Cretan poet, and he said, it was him that said, all Cretans are liars. And so the paradox was, if Epimenides was a Cretan himself, could he be believed if all Cretans are liars? And so this was a famous sort of logical problem. If Epimenides, a Cretan, said all the Cretans are liars, can you believe Epimenides because he himself is a Cretan? But Paul is using this proverb, if you like, that's been said to say this is why there's so much trouble in Crete, because Epimenides himself, who was a Cretan, said Cretans are given to lying. And so he says, watch out for the false teaching, or the Greek word he uses, mateologia, vain talking, vain babbling, empty talk. And he's saying, beware of the false talking, and make sure that people are rooted into the truth. And actually, the purity of teaching is obvious to those who are pure, says Paul. If you want to know what pure teaching is, just ask the pure people, and there'll be something that they are sensitive to here. But watch out for those who are faithless. Watch out for those who are deluded and defiled. Don't follow them. Paul is very clear here about the need to be discerning. There is a role of discernment here. Where there's good leadership in place and good discernment in place, the church can be built up. But there's always that possibility that there's other forces coming in that we need to be sensitive to as well in our day and age. We can do this by being sensitive to the Holy Spirit, by allowing him to purify our hearts, and thereby following the true word of the Lord to us. Have a very good October 26th.